nation will endure as it has endured.
Our long national nightmare is over.
Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey.
Hello, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barrett.
And I'm Cesar Millan.
This week, Texas Democrats stage a walkout to stop a crackdown on voting rights. And dog whisperer Cesar Millan has some advice for Major Biden's owners.
Also this week, the US won't rejoin a treaty that allowed Russia and America to spy on each other. We're going to find out what that means, plus the latest on efforts to get America vaccinated. But first...
This week, Republican lawmakers in Texas tried to pass a bill imposing some of the most restrictive voting measures in America.
It would ban drive-through voting, restrict mail-in ballots, adding a new voter ID requirement, and pushes back early voting hours on Sunday, a time when we know black residents head to the polls after leaving church.
And it looked certain to pass the Republican majority House after clearing the state Senate. But late on Sunday night, something unexpected happened.
Democrats walked out of the chamber, and that left the Texas legislature without the required number of lawmakers needed to pass the bill by a midnight deadline.
But it may be a short-lived victory for Democrats. Republican Governor Greg Abbott is prepared to call lawmakers back for a special session to revive the voting measure. Texas Republicans aim to join at least 13 other states who've restricted voter access since last November's election, claiming to be restoring confidence in the electoral system after former President Trump's false claims of widespread fraud. The man who defeated Trump by 7 million votes, President Joe Biden, is increasing pressure on the US Senate now to pass a new Voting Rights Act.
Earlier this year, the House of Representatives passed For the People Act to protect our democracy. The Senate will take it up later this month, and I'm going to fight like heck with every tool at my disposal for its passage.
He's going to fight like heck, all right. He can't even get 50 Democrats to support that legislation. Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia has already spoken out against it, but let's go back to Texas. That voting bill has some nasty little bits in it, John. Like, for instance, disabled people were able to mail in ballots if they had a sickness or physical condition that stopped them from turning up to the polling place on election day without assistance or harming their health. But now, the Texas legislature's changing that to saying they can't get a mail-in ballot unless they're not physically capable of getting to the polls on election day at all, even if it would harm their health. And the lack of transport? No excuse, apparently. Furthermore, the bill removes the right of pregnant women to get an absentee ballot if they think they might be in labour on election day. So you might be wondering just how much voter fraud the disabled and heavily pregnant are committing. Well, right now there are 43 people with pending voter fraud charges in Texas, and exactly one of those is from the 2020 election. Not sure they're pregnant either. The thing is that as mean as some of these provisions are, though, they're unlikely to sway an election. As a friend of the White House said, there are workarounds to some of these provisions. What the White House is more concerned about is the possibility that Republicans might refuse to certify clear Democratic wins, like Trump was pressuring them to do last year. There is a provision or two that makes that more likely in this bill too. Like, for instance, for a judge to overturn an election under this bill, they no longer need evidence of fraud altering the outcome of a race. They simply need enough ballots illegally cast to match the winning margin. Also, the legal standard for overturning an election has just been revised down from reasonable doubt to preponderance of evidence. That's a much lower legal bar to clear. I should say, by the way, that this is not just Texas. The most blatantly dodgy change is actually in Arizona, where the Republican legislature has stripped Secretary of State Katie Hobbs of her ability to defend election lawsuits and given that power to the Attorney General. Coincidentally, Hobbs is a Democrat and the Attorney General is a Republican. But wait, what happens after the election when there could be new people in those positions with new parties?
Tell us, Chaz.
Well, then the provision sunsets. Like I said, kind of dodgy, John.
Sounds a bit that way. So, do Texas Democrats have another procedural trick up their sleeves, or is it now down to their colleagues in Washington, D.C. to try and act on this? Texas State Representative Carl Sherman is one of the Democrats who led led that walkout last weekend, and he joins us now. Mr. Sherman, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you, John, for having me.
So this was certainly an eye-catching tactic of yours last Sunday, but you can't stay locked out forever. Surely this bill is now just going to pass.
Well, I believe that through the legislative process, there's always room for compromise, and that's the very reason individuals vote for their elected representatives, for them to get their views and their opinions across the table and reach some sort of compromise. And that's what our intent is.
And what would that compromise look like?
The compromise to me would look really more like making it easier for folks to vote, while at the same time maintaining the security that's currently in our system that provides us the integrity that we currently have.
So did you guys walk out because of the actual details of the bill, or because there are a bunch of late-breaking changes that you weren't consulted about?
Yeah, it's a combination of those things. Chaz, as you probably know, the bill that left the House was dramatically different than the bill that came back from the Senate. Those changes that were made in the 11th hour and sent to us without the ability to review provide a lot of distrust in the legislative process. And then the fact is, these provisions that were placed on issues like making it less as far as available time to vote on Sundays, when many of my constituents vote through a program called Souls to the Polls. These are successful programs to engage our faith-based community in the electoral process that were cut off.
Now, there's already talk of the dubious proposed early voting hours for Sunday being revised as a result of this stand. So, first of all, do you think they will be revised? And secondly, if they are revised, will that be enough, do you think, to get you guys back?
Well, I certainly think that's a low-hanging fruit for the party to offer. And I think that it will be revised. I think that some of their members have already tried to walk back that provision as though it were a mistake. Fact is, this is the same legislative party that introduced this session that people can buy beer at 10 o'clock on Sunday, but they can't vote now until 1 o'clock. And this is certainly a change. But there are some other changes that we have to have in order to make voting something that's seen as a liberty and not something that could be punitive for someone to participate in our democracy. Every vote should count.
And Carl Sherman, what do you say to those who would say, look, the right to vote is something that men and women have fought and died for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you're saying people can't even get out of their car in order to vote. They want to drive through as if they're buying a cheeseburger. Surely they should value their vote a little bit more highly than that.
Well, truly, that's a very good example you give. However, voting has changed over the years. And just as paying for your gas has changed at the gas stations, you used to get out of your car and go into the gas station attendant to pay. Now you just pay at the pump. And as we evolve, and as many democracies have shown, people are voting from home in some industrialized nations, and America should be the leading innovator of participating in our democracy.
Now, Mr. Sherman, the Republicans aren't in power in Texas because of gerrymandering or corruption. They're in power because more Texans voted for them. So why shouldn't they get to pass whatever laws they like, even if they are awful?
Yeah, well, I would agree with you that they're not in office by corruption, but I would not agree that it was not done through the influence of gerrymandering, because that is a part of our political system. Is the majority party at the time of the census gets to actually create the district boundaries. And so therefore, what you've seen in America is a change in which the elected officials are actually choosing our citizens as opposed to the other way around.
Mr. Sherman, aren't you Democrats guilty of a huge hypocritical double standard here? On the one hand, you're using a minority stalling tactic, an obstruction tactic in Texas to stop this voting bill going through, at the same time complaining that Republicans who are in the minority in Washington are using a tactic, such as the filibuster, to stop voting laws go through there.
Well, I would agree that Republicans and Democrats often behave similarly in different situations. However, on the state level, the Republican Party left us with no other choice but to use every legal recourse that we could. And this was one of those measures to ensure that our citizens' voices were heard and that they would continue to be able to participate in our democracy. On the federal level, I'm sure that there are some issues there that I know that we would love to get rid of the filibuster process that they have there, which goes back to the Jim Crow era.
Carl Sherman, great to have you with us. Thanks for being on Planet America.
You too, John. Chaz, thank you.
This week, America commemorated two significant anniversaries. Memorial Day was on Monday, when Americans honour those who served in wartime. It's a tradition dating back to the post-Civil War era, now a national holiday, which also marks the unofficial start of summer, ordinarily a time for vacations, summer camps and driving holidays, although things are still a little bit different this year. Speaking at the Arlington National Cemetery, President Biden had this warning.
Democracy itself is in peril, here at home and around the world. What we do now, how we honor the memory of the fallen, will determine whether or not democracy will long endure.
And he also used the occasion to make this rather pointed comment on voting rights.
Democracy thrives when the infrastructure of democracy is strong, when people have the right to vote freely and fairly and conveniently.
And here is something to ponder as well. Almost as many American veterans take their own lives each year as have lost their lives in all of the years, in all of the wars since 9/11. Around 6,500 according to the most recent data. And that was from before the COVID pandemic. And there are fears that's only gone up since then. This week also marked 100 years since one of the most appalling acts of racist violence in America's history, the Tulsa Massacre. Until a few years ago, this extraordinary sequence of events in Oklahoma on May 31st and June 1st, 1921 had been largely forgotten or perhaps largely ignored. In the early 20th century, the Greenwood district of Tulsa was one of the most affluent African-American neighbourhoods in America, a magnet for black business people and professionals, doctors, lawyers, academics. It was known as Black Wall Street until the 2 days when a white mob attacked with clubs and guns, killing up to 300 people, injuring 800 more, destroying 1,000 buildings. White police officers and National Guardsmen were sent in, but in many cases they joined the attackers. This week, President Biden recalled some of the horrors, including an unprecedented attack from the air.
Private planes dropping explosives. The first and only domestic aerial assault of its kind on an American city, here in Tulsa.
All up, more than 30 blocks in Greenwood were levelled. 10,000 people were left homeless. It was triggered by a seemingly minor incident when a black man may have tripped a white woman. The local newspapers cried rape and called for the man's lynching, setting that crowd on their murderous rampage.
Fuse of fury was an innocent interaction that turned into a terrible headline allegation of a black male teenager attacking a white female teenager.
Last week, the oldest living survivor of the Tulsa Massacre, 107-year-old Viola Fletcher, testified before the United States Congress, calling for reparations for the handful of survivors. Her memories still vivid 100 years later.
I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I have lived through the massacre every day.
Greenwood in 1921 was an extreme situation, but far from a unique one. At the time, lynchings were still common in America. The Ku Klux Klan was resurgent, marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House itself. President Harding passed a series of racist anti-immigration laws. It was also the same time when many of the Confederate statues were being erected, creating this myth of a noble lost cause of Southern slave owners. The Tulsa Race Massacre is a simply astonishing piece of American history. We did do a segment on it a couple of years ago, and we've reposted that now on Facebook, YouTube and ABC iView for you to see again. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking, Chaz, well and truly on the Biden administration's efforts to reach a bipartisan agreement on a major infrastructure spending bill. President Biden's opening bid in late March was a $2.3 trillion package, which he described as a once-in-a-generation investment in America. Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, are suffering from a bit of sticker shock and have also winced at Biden's plan to make companies pay more tax in order to fund it.
So far, this administration has recommended we spend $7 trillion additional dollars this year. That would be more than we spent in adjusted inflation dollars to win World War II.
Still, Mitch does seem reasonably keen on getting to a deal at the right price. Meanwhile, President Biden has the option of passing the bill on a simple majority party line vote through reconciliation, but only if moderate Democrat Senator Joe Manchin falls into line, and he insists that Biden try and do a deal with Republicans first. And so the haggling has been continuing for weeks and weeks. The Republican negotiations being led by Manchin's West Virginia counterpart, Shelley Moore Capito, who after an initial offer of around $600 billion this week came up with a second package, still less than half the size of Biden's original plan, narrowing the definition of what's considered infrastructure, basically just roads, rails, water power, ports, bridges, not human infrastructure such as carers.
The alternative, which is a partisan reconciliation process, would be destructive to our future bipartisan attempts, but also doesn't serve the American public and wouldn't get us to an infrastructure package such as the one we believe would serve the American interests, but also constrain spending to the areas of core physical infrastructure that is so important to this country.
But also, the Republican plan is over 8 years, not 5, and also only $257 billion of the $900-odd billion they're talking about is actually new spending. It's mostly repurposed COVID funding.
Yeah, so apart from how much to spend and how much to pay for it, it's basically a done deal right now. Democrats do say, though, that the negotiations have been quite constructive and conducted in good faith, but they are definitely getting impatient.
It's an old expression, fish or cut bait. I think we're getting to that moment.
We hope to move forward with Republicans, but we're not going to let them saying no stand in our way.
But at some point, we have to move forward.
And that point looks like being next week. And the omens, you'd have to say, aren't really that great either. Joe Manchin was sounding less than confident about the chance of bipartisanship, particularly after last weekend we saw the failure of that bill to establish a commission to investigate the January 6th pro-Trump insurrection at the US Capitol building. Here's what he said.
This commission passed the House with a bipartisan vote. The failed vote in the Senate had 6 brave Republicans, but that was 4 short of the 10 necessary to advance the legislation. Choosing to put politics and political election above the health of our democracy is unconscionable. And the betrayal of the oath that we each take is something they will have to live with.
So, Chaz, Joe Manchin remains very much the key here. He insisted that Biden genuinely pursue a bipartisan deal on infrastructure, but once that's exhausted, it is expected that Manchin will probably support the Democrats if they go it alone, or maybe they'll carve it up, pass what they can on a bipartisan basis, and then maybe try and come back again with their own wish list later and try and pass it through a budget reconciliation.
It's really not clear at this point in time, but it is worth noting that Biden did get a bit narky with Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema earlier this week.
I hear all the folks on TV saying, why doesn't Biden get this done? Well, because Biden only has a majority of effectively 4 votes in the House and a tie in the Senate, with 2 members of the Senate who vote more with my Republican friends.
Obviously referring to Manchin and Sinema there, but that's a bit much given that Sinema and Manchin have voted with the White House 100% of the time under Biden. Also, we shouldn't assume that reconciliation would be easy either. The Democrats thought that they could revise reconciliation bills so they could have multiple bites of the cherry. But the umpire for Senate rules, the parliamentarian, she delivered a ruling this week saying that revising a reconciliation bill would take just as long as passing a new one, and also they need a legitimate reason to do so. Getting around the Senate filibuster ain't gonna cut it. So maybe reconciliation would not be such a cinch. The strange thing about all these delicate manoeuvres to try and pass an infrastructure bill is that this week a transportation bill passed through a Senate committee with unanimous support. That's the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, which spends $303 billion on highways, roads and bridges, an increase of more than 34%. That kind of sounds like an infrastructure bill to me, John, but it's flying through the Senate. It's funny how that works. Before we leave this, though, we should add that there are hot rumours at the moment that Biden just came back with another offer of about $1 trillion. That's the Republicans' ballpark figure. And without a corporate tax hike, which they were saying no to, but he'd say he'd pay for it with a minimum corporate tax of 15%. So we'll see, first of all, if that turns out to be true, and secondly, what happens from there and what Emperor Joe Manchin has to say about it all.
It is a fast-moving situation, Chaz. Since coming to office, President Biden has reversed the Trump administration's decision to quit the Paris Climate Treaty. The World Health Organization as well has been rejoined. They're trying to rewrite the Iran nuclear deal as well, which Trump tore up. But this week, the Biden administration informed Russia it would not be rejoining a key arms control pact known as the Open Skies Treaty, which had allowed surveillance flights over military facilities in both countries. It had been in operation since the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, but no more.
Yeah, it was basically a mutually agreeable way of allowing countries to spy on each other until Trump left the treaty last year. The Biden administration, their view of this all is that the treaty has been undermined by Russia's violations, and so they're not going to rejoin it. Fair enough, except I can't help remembering a Biden campaign statement from this time last year saying that Trump should have remained in the Open Skies Treaty because these Russian violations should be addressed not by withdrawing from the treaty, but by seeking to resolve the violations through the treaty's dispute mechanism. That's going to take some explaining. Luckily, John, we have someone, I think, who might be able to do just that.
Yeah, we sure do, Chaz. Ambassador Stephen Pifer is the former Russia advisor to President Bill Clinton. He served in a number of senior State Department roles, including US Ambassador to Ukraine. These days, he's based at the Brookings Institution in Washington. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to Planet America.
Well, thank you for having me.
I would imagine that a lot of our viewers would be surprised to hear that there even was such a thing as the Open Skies Treaty, this idea that Russian planes can fly over America and look at what they want, and American planes can fly over Russia and look at what they want. What even was the point of that, given that both sides presumably have no shortage of spy satellites? They know what's going on, don't they?
Yeah, well, the idea actually goes back to the 1950s and Dwight Eisenhower, but then President George H.W. Bush revived the idea. And when you talk about satellites, yes, the United States has satellites, the Soviet Union, Russia have satellites, but this was the idea of using unarmed aircraft, and you could bring other countries in which didn't have access to space. And so that was the arrangement. You ultimately had about 34 member states, the United States, Russia, Canada, and then the rest of the countries in Europe.
And why, in your view, or if it isn't your view, why, in your view, was it an important treaty?
I think it was a useful confidence building measure because it gave countries the ability to overfly other countries. They had cameras, they could take pictures, the pictures were unclassified and were made available to all other parties of the treaty, but allowed you to look at another country's military forces, how they were positioned, exercises, things like that. And the whole idea was that kind of transparency would reduce the risk of surprise attack and would just generally raise confidence. And this was one of the agreements that was negotiated really in sort of the golden age of arms control in the late 80s and early 1990s.
And is there evidence of it having served a positive role in any conflicts in terms of nations being able to verify what their potential rivals or enemies were up to?
Well, I think in most cases, the flights pretty much showed that, what people expected. But again, it was just this idea that if I can go and look at your military dispositions and I understand them, then they may seem less threatening to me. And that was really, I think, the contribution to the trip that the treaty made. And there was something like more than 1,500 overflights conducted over the course of the treaty.
Now, the Biden administration is saying they're going to stay out because Russia is cheating. Allow me to read a quote for you from the Biden campaign in May last year when Trump withdrew from Open Skies. These Russian violations should be addressed not by withdrawing from the treaty, but by seeking to resolve them through the treaty's implementation and dispute mechanism. Now, I know you can't play mind reader, but why do you think Biden might have changed his mind?
Yeah, well, let me first of all say I agree with what then candidate Biden said last year, in that, yes, the Russians had violated the treaty, but they were not violations that really got to the heart of the treaty. And in fact, what the United States did is the United States had imposed some reciprocal restrictions on Russia's ability to overfly the United States. So you had those restrictions kind of balance out. So I actually think maintaining the treaty would have been a good idea. But I think when Mr. Biden got to the White House, there were probably 4 or 5 reasons why they decided ultimately not to try to rejoin the treaty. Because, of course, that's what changed when Mr. Biden made that comment back last year. The United States was still in the treaty, was in the process of withdrawing, but the Trump administration did, in fact, withdraw. That happened in November. And so now I think there are 4 or 5 issues that made the Biden administration decide that trying to rejoin the treaty would just be too difficult.
Can you sum those up for us? What are those key reasons?
Sure. First of all, the Russian violations have not been addressed. The Russians continue those, or the Russians haven't said they're going to fix the violations. And in fact, what Moscow says is they didn't violate the treaty. I think that's number 1. Number 2 is a technical reason, which is just the 2 aircraft that the United States Air Force has used for open skies flights. They're basically military versions of the Boeing 707. They're really old. They're hard to sustain in terms of finding spare parts and things like that, and very costly. Third was, I think when the Biden administration got into office, in terms of arms control, they've got other priorities, strategic stability talks with Russia, and then getting into a nuclear arms reduction negotiation. And I think most arms control people would say those are probably more important than the Open Skies Treaty. And I think the last problem was that it was hard to see how the US government could rejoin the treaty. The route prescribed by the treaty would be that the United States would again sign the treaty and then submit it to the Senate for advice and consent for ratification. But just politically, it was hard to see the current Senate. You'd need 17 Republicans to vote for ratification. But would 17 Republicans in 2021 vote to consent to ratify a treaty that a Republican administration in 2020 had withdrawn from? Politically, it was just very hard to see that. Now, maybe if instead of those 4 or 5 problems, you had 2 or 3, there might have been a different outcome. But it just seems to me that there were too many challenges, the hill was too steep, and the Biden administration decided it wasn't worth the fight.
So if America stays out of Open Skies, does that effectively kill the treaty?
I think the Russian reaction probably puts an end to the treaty. The Russians earlier this year said that, look, if the United States is not going to come back into the treaty, we will begin our own withdrawal procedures. And Russia has, over the past 4.5 months, done their internal procedures. They actually have to go to their Federal Assembly, their Federal Council. I think the Federal Council just today or yesterday has approved the withdrawal mechanism. And so once the Russians finalize their internal procedures, they will then formally give 6 months notice to the other treaty parties of their intention to withdraw. And then once you have the United States out and the Russians out, of the remaining 32 members, 27 of them, I think, are NATO members. And so the treaty really begins to lose the purpose in terms of you don't need the sorts of confidence building measures between NATO countries that were useful between, say, NATO and Russia or Russia and NATO.
I wonder, Mr. Ambassador, what are the implications for one of your old stamping grounds, Ukraine? Clearly, there are lots of concerns about military manoeuvring happening on the Russian side of that border.
Yeah, this was one of the things where I think Open Skies was actually useful politically, is since 2014, when the Russians illegally seized Crimea and used military force to provoke the conflict in eastern Ukraine and the Donbass region, the United States actually, in coordination with Ukraine, conducted open skies flights over Ukraine along that line of contact. And I think that was a useful way to send a message to Moscow that other people were very much watching what was happening along that line. So that mechanism will no longer be available, although people who follow orbital tracks have noticed that Global Hawk surveillance planes fly over that track quite a bit now. So Russia's being now watched in Crimea, and the actions of Russian proxy forces in Donbass are being watched. It's just not being done by the Open Skies Treaty. It's being done by aircraft that are flying over Ukraine with Ukraine's permission on a bilateral basis.
Mr. Ambassador, we certainly appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Time now for an update on the COVID pandemic in America, and there are increasing signs that life is getting back to normal, something close to it with the summer holidays on the way, and the vaccination program also seems pretty much on track to meet the Biden administration's target of 70% of the adult population with at least one shot in their arm by July 4th, Independence Day. But in order to hit that mark, yesterday President Biden announced a month of action, including measures like 24-hour pharmacies offering overnight and early morning vaccinations for people who work shifts, Chaz.
Yeah, and he might need all the help he can get, John, because I actually disagree with you. I think for once Biden has set himself a challenging target. I don't think this is easy. As of yesterday, 62.9% of adults had at least one dose. But 32 days before that, it was 55.4% of adults who had at least one dose. So let's project that forward from yesterday, 32 days, to get to July 4. You get 70.4%, just hitting the target if vaccinations proceed at exactly the same rate as the last month. But they won't do that because daily vaccinations have been steadily dropping for months. They're still on the way down. That's what the last 32 days looks like, that zone there. That's why we've seen all kinds of desperate acts trying to incentivize vaccinations, like Ohio giving away $1 million a week in a vaccination lottery, which, by the way, worked. If we compare vaccination numbers to the day Ohio announced their lottery, you can see Ohio pretty much mirrored the vaccination trends of America as a whole, all the way up to the week of the lottery. Then things changed big time. They picked up a lot. So much so that now a whole bunch of states are trying out vaccination lotteries. My two faves are California, with their curiously specific $116.5 million giveaway, and West Virginia with weekly prizes that include 2 custom trucks, 5 hunting rifles, and 5 shotguns. Know your audience. Either way, they definitely need to get their vaccines up, and I'll tell you why. This is the share of Americans who have had at least one dose. And this is the share of the Brits who have had at least one dose. As you can see, they're doing a fair bit better than America is. In fact, the UK is doing so well, it just experienced a day with 0 COVID deaths for the first time since March last year. Even though it was coming off a weekend, so that is a slight disclaimer. But nevertheless, if we look at the daily cases, there's a small wave building. Why is that? It's because the UK is experiencing the rapid spread of the India or Delta variant. That is 67% more infectious than the UK variant. There's also a study that suggests the AstraZeneca vaccine might produce particularly low levels of antibodies against the Indian variant. The jury is still out though on that, with another study saying that it's highly effective against the Indian variant. I don't know. Either way, not being vaccinated at all, that's not very good protection. So, the fact that the Indian variant is now spreading rapidly in America, already making up 7% of new cases, suggests Americans should get vaccinated fast. One more thing that's coming up over the next few weeks, BuzzFeed obtained 3,200 pages of COVID point man Dr. Fauci's emails through a Freedom of Information lawsuit. They covered the first 6 months of last year, so there's plenty of good stuff there about what Fauci was up to during the pandemic. But anyone who remembers the Hillary Clinton emails knows what we're heading for. Weeks of emails that seem controversial at first sight, but might not seem quite so bad under greater scrutiny. Take this email, for instance. It's to Fauci from scientist Christian Anderson in February last year. Anderson said that some of the COVID features looked potentially engineered, but he'd know more at the end of the weekend because they had to look at it a lot more closely, and their opinions could still change. Well, Australian reporter Sherry Markson noticed that Anderson's opinions did indeed change when 6 weeks later he wrote a piece insisting the virus was natural. This is a massive cover-up, she concluded. But is it really a cover-up? That same scientist responded to the conjecture saying that he had seriously considered a lab leak a possibility, but new data, analyses and discussions had changed his mind, and he considered that to simply be the way the scientific process works. You think through these things. In fact, he noted that he wasn't ruling out that a lab leak happened or that it was a possibility. He just felt it seemed unlikely and there were more likely hypotheses. And then he wrote a whole bunch of dense science to explain why he felt that. And that science, of course, was completely ignored. But that, John, is exactly the kind of thing that is worth reading before we jump to conclusions. So please just be patient over the next few weeks. At least more patient than Twitter is.
Oh, he's covering up the cover-up, Chaz. That's clearly what's going on. And now it's time for... And we've been closely following the travails of President Biden's youngest dog, Major, who's had some well-publicised problems adjusting to life in the White House.
And on Monday, the first family's younger dog, Major, was surprised by an unfamiliar person and reacted in a way that resulted in a minor injury to the individual, which was handled by the White House medical unit with no further treatment needed.
That's White House speak for the dog bit a Secret Service dude, and it was his second offence as well, prompting questions like this from the press corps.
You also reassure the public that Major Biden will not be euthanized as a result of this?
Well, certainly Major Biden is a member of the family, so I can assure you that.
A great relief to all members of the Biden family, I'm sure. The 3-year-old German Shepherd and former shelter dog was sent away for extra training recently, but according to America's best-known dog trainer, that's probably a bad idea. Cesar Millan is the host of a long-running TV show, cultural icon and author of best-selling books including Caesar's Way. Cesar Millan, welcome to Planet America.
My pleasure. Happy to help and anything I can.
So were you surprised when you heard that Major Biden was having so many problems adjusting to his new life in the White House?
So this is actually very normal. What it tells you, you know, what Major is telling you is the world is still don't know how to connect, communicate, and have a relationship based on trust, respect, and love. This can be prevented if you do the proper introduction to the environment. That could work for everybody. If you do the proper introduction to humans, you know, and many times people say, well, there's a lot of people there. Well, actually better. It takes a village to raise a child. So the more people, the better. That means, you know, not everybody is busy all the time. So that person can be in charge of helping Major just to do the right thing, which is rules, boundaries, and limitations. Major bid a Secret Service, and also he bid one of the people they help in the lawn. So obviously a dog doesn't understand that one is a Secret Service and the other one is a landscaper. You know what? And he doesn't know that, you know, his dad or his, you know, human is the president of the United States. He doesn't know he lives in the White House. You know, so the only thing he knows is the proper introduction on the environment and with the people was not properly done.
And Cesar, do you think that Major should have been retrained in the White House rather than being sent away as he was?
Listen, it's not about training the dog. It's not about training the dog. There is no knowledge behind instincts. It's all reaction. You have to train the humans. The humans, he's reacting to the lack of knowledge of the human. He's not an aggressive dog, right? He's reacting. So why would a dog react? Well, if he believes that he owns the environment, so many people allow a dog to just walk inside the new environment and let the dog make himself at home. But that creates a problem because the dog becomes territorial. If a dog is not properly introduced to people, he doesn't know who to trust and, you know, and why to trust them. And so that also creates a little bit of uncertainty or fear. And if a dog believes that, you know, that the pack is under his command, under his charge, and then he can also act as a personal defense, right? So the dog can act and bite in 3 different ways: territorial, out of uncertainty, and also because he feels that he needs to protect. So it's not the dog. We need to make sure that the humans get trained. That's what I keep saying my whole entire career. I don't train dogs. I train people and end up rehabilitating dogs. You know, in the White House, everybody gets trained. So it's a safety protocol and how to be. I've been in the White House a few times. And so it's a safety protocol that you have to follow. I have helped few presidents, right? So the thing is they have not yet created a protocol for dogs in the White House. And so that's really what the problem is. It's not the dog.
And as I recall, the now late Bo Obama, the Portuguese water dog that the Obamas had a few problems behaviourally in the White House as well. You were called in to help, as I recall as well. Should we even have dogs in the White House? Is it a bad place for dogs?
Oh my God, yes, of course. The dog, I mean, listen, the White House is, in my opinion, a very stressful house. So you need someone who reminds you about natural, simple, and profound. It's like having a kangaroo. You know, it's like kangaroos doesn't care about politics, doesn't care about economy, doesn't care about, any kind of stress, any kind of drama. So we need Mother Nature. A dog is part of Mother Nature. You know, if we see it as a dog, and then we don't really give him the status that he requires, the place that he needs. You know, a dog represents unconditional love. A dog represents pursuit of happiness. A dog represents natural, simple, profound. You know, so. I think every president in the world should have a dog. We need animals to really remember what really matters, matters is family, matters is love, matters is simplicity, matters is just exercise, and so absolutely, animals should be in every single home, even if people, don't want to keep them for a long time, don't forget that, you can always foster a dog, foster an animal. It's just about you practicing connection, communication, and relationship in a very simple way.
So, having worked with a number of White House dogs over the year, if President Biden were to pick up the phone and say, Cesar, what can I do to sort out May Joe? What would your advice be?
Well, we need to put the whole entire staff in the White House and learn the same thing. So that way it's agreement, commitment, and follow through, So like again, it's a safety protocol. So we just have to know how we all work together, It's the whole White House staff becomes a pack and they really show that they're there for the dog.
Cesar Millan, such good fun to talk to you. Thanks very much for your time today.
Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Love you guys. Thank you.
Yes, it's time once again to sit back with a warm drink and a cold fake fire. And Chaz, the first media reports have come out in the last few hours based on that US government investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena, what we used to call UFOs, and it seems to provide few, if any, answers at all. The New York Times reporting today, intelligence officials have found no evidence that UFOs are alien spacecraft, no evidence, but they can't explain what Navy pilots and others have been seeing. Reportedly, this report did establish the vast majority of over 100 incidents it examined did not originate from any American military or other advanced US government technology. So they've ruled that out. The report concedes that much about the observed phenomenon remains difficult to explain, including their acceleration, their ability to change direction and suddenly submerge. So the question remains, Chaz, is this some secret hypersonic Russian or Chinese technology, or is it something else? We appear to be none the wiser, except for the fact, as Luis Elizondo told us just last week, either way, this is a failure of US intelligence. They don't know.
Yeah, I'm shocked that there were no answers. Yeah, but look, we'll have more to say when the actual report comes out. We should probably hold our fire to it.
Yes, and there is always the classified annex, which is going to Congress, but we will not get to see. So I think everybody's going to still believe what they believed yesterday on this topic. But look, it's before we know it, it's going to be the next presidential election in 2024. The primary campaign will be getting underway in early 2023, such as the nature of these things, assuming there is a primary on either side. And this week, the state of Nevada, which usually has in recent cycles been voting fourth for the Democratic and Republican presidential nominee, looks like they want to be first now.
Yeah, they're talking about, and going as a primary as well, not as a caucus, which they were before, which makes a bit more sense. They're passing a law. We should say the governor of Nevada hasn't said he's going to sign it yet. But the legislature, both houses, have passed a law saying they will go first as the first primary. New Hampshire has their own law saying they will go first.
And Iowa has a law saying they will also, as a caucus, go before the first primary in New Hampshire. The last time this happened was 2008, when you had a couple of states, including Florida and Michigan and Pennsylvania, I think they tried to leapfrog Iowa and New Hampshire because Iowa, 94% white, New Hampshire, 95% white. They're not representative, Nevada a lot more so. And in the end, we had the first caucus and primaries starting basically on the 2nd of January. They ended up bringing the whole process up a month. We could see the same again, or after what happened with Iowa last time, maybe Nevada gets it.
Yeah, the bottom line is it's up to the Democrats, because if the Democrats don't want New Hampshire to go first, they just won't give them any delegates.
Yeah.
And then people will ignore them.
That's right. And the party can decide if the delegates count. You can have your primary or your caucus, but we don't have to count the people that you vote for. So the other big news.
And the Republicans aren't going to do it either.
They're not going to do it.
Just Democrats.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
Talking about Republicans.
Yes.
Yeah.
So last week we established that I was probably the only person in the world reading Donald Trump's blog from the desk of Donald J. Trump. This week, where's it gone?
It's gone to the ether. They've closed it down. On this last day, it only was shared or commented on 1,500 times. That's like our website, Facebook page.
That's
so
good, Chaz. That's good. Why wouldn't he keep that going? So yes, the report said that apparently stung by the fact that nobody cares, Donald Trump said, okay, get rid of it.
Yeah, which is, look, I understand where he's coming from. It probably was a little bit embarrassing to him, but it was his method of getting his message out. People still reported on the message. We did, other people did, but I guess he's about to do rallies now in the next month or so, so he'll start getting his message out that way. Apparently also, he's having a word to conservative writers to try and write his message for him.
Yeah, right.
About election fraud.
Right, so there are these reports we talked about earlier, Maggie Haberman tweeting about it. A number of reports have come out in the last 48 hours saying that Trump truly believes not only that the election was stolen, but that with the kind of audity thing that's happening in Arizona and the fact that they're maybe going to do audity things with the same cyber ninjas in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia, and he'll be made president again by the end of the summer. I mean, this is ranting in the bunker stuff, isn't it?
It's getting a little bit embarrassing, but the fact is that all his followers, not all, a lot of his followers believe it as well. So I guess it's not embarrassing.
Yeah,
amongst themselves.
Yeah, and I guess that's the big question now for Republicans who have Trump speaking in, I think, North Carolina this weekend at the Republican conference. Do they treat Trump do they try and sort of push him into elder statesman role, or do they allow him to keep being sort of the deposed president in exile who genuinely believes he is still president, because he's billed his address this weekend as a presidential address, not as a former presidential.
53% of Republicans think he is the legitimate president.
Do they really,
They think he won the election.
Aren't they just trolling pollsters? They're not
Maybe.
Stupid.
Maybe.
Honest.
Maybe. But look, we should say as well that this is the new phase of Trump, whatever he's going to be.
Yep.
The new phase is beginning now, because obviously the blog is finished. He's starting the rallies this month, apparently. Jason Miller, his spokesperson, said he's going to join a social media platform in the next little while. I assume it'll be Parler, probably, but we don't know. Whatever it is, when he does join a real social media platform, it's all going to start.
It's funny, I'm old enough to remember when he said he was going to start his own social media platform, but that maybe the blog has dissuaded himself of that. Time for some malarkey.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Former President Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was a star attraction at this week's For God and Country Patriot Roundup event in Dallas, Texas, when he got this question.
I'm a simple Marine. I want to know why what happened in Myanmar can't happen here.
No reason. I mean, it should happen here. No reason. That's right.
And to some people, like journalist Justin Glore, that sounded like Flynn was calling for a Myanmar-style coup to replace the sitting US president with Donald Trump. And this Myanmar-style coup idea has been around for a while. It is very big in QAnon conspiracy theory circles.
Biden is he's like a puppet president. The military is in charge. It's going to be like Myanmar. What's happening in Myanmar? The military is doing their own investigation, and at the right time, they're going to be restoring the republic with Trump as president.
What's going on in Myanmar right now? The government took over and they're redoing the election, correct? That could possibly happen here, possibly.
Would you like to see it happen?
Absolutely.
I would like to see it happen. Really? Yes.
You know why? Because the election was stolen from us.
And we did just speak about how Trump thinks he's coming back by August as well. And the legal expert for that theory was apparently Mike Lindell, a man whose actual job is to sell pillows on infomercials.
Oh, yes, and he's got some help selling those pillows as well. Take a look at this.
Sleeping on my pillows for some time. I love them. They're simply the very best pillows ever made. But I just found out that they also have a wide assortment of other incredible products like their mattress topper, sheets, towels, and slippers, and more.
So much for the former president's lawyer. Back to his 23-day National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn. And this was his response on social media. He says there is no reason for a coup in America. He says he did not call for one. He claims that he said there is no reason it should happen here. OK, let's go back to the tape.
I'm a simple Marine. I want to know why what happened in Myanmar can't happen here.
No reason. I mean, it should happen here. No reason. Right? That's right.
Right, so Flynn was clearly asked, why can't a coup happen? He said, there's no reason. He said, I mean, it should happen here. He put the emphasis on the should. He did not say there is no reason it should happen. Now, maybe he was just pandering to that crowd. He is the locker-up guy after all. But Mike Flynn's denial is malarkey.
Yeah, exactly. When they cheered him, he said, that's right. Yeah. We should say as well, by the way, calling for a coup was not out of character for that event that Flynn was speaking at. The event's official logo was this hat with the initials for "Where we go one, we go all" written on it. That phrase is QAnon's slogan. And Trump ally Sidney Powell was also at that same event, openly predicting that Trump would be reinstated as president sometime soon.
That he can simply be reinstated, that a new inauguration date is set. And Biden is told to move out of the White House, and and President Trump should be moved back in.
Calling for a coup isn't exactly out of character for Michael Flynn either. Back in December, he told us that while he wasn't calling for martial law, it wouldn't be a big deal if someone did, and the military should rerun the election.
Within the swing states, if he wanted to, he could take military capabilities and he could place them in those states and basically rerun an election in each of those states. I mean, it's not unprecedented. I mean, these people out there talking about martial law, it's like it's something that we've never done. Martial law has been instituted 64 times, Greg.
And that was 4 days after the Electoral College had met and voted Biden in as president, by the way. If only crazy was a renewable energy source, we'd be sweet. But not every seemingly unhinged statement is worthy of condemnation. Matt Gaetz this week got the treatment on Twitter for apparently calling for the shooting of Silicon Valley titans.
The internet's hall monitors out in Silicon Valley, they think they can suppress us, discourage us. Maybe if you're just a little less patriotic, maybe if you just conform to their way of thinking a little more, that you'll be allowed to participate in the digital world. Well, you know what? Silicon Valley can't cancel this movement, or this rally, or this congressman. We have a Second Amendment in this country, and I think we have an obligation to use it.
But it turns out that on this occasion, Gaetz was unfairly accused. This clip goes for a while, so we'll fast forward a bit. But I want to play you what happened directly before and after the clip we just saw.
Let us use the Constitution to strengthen our argument and our movement. We have a First Amendment right to speak and assemble, and we better use it. The internet's hall monitors out in Silicon Valley, they think they can suppress us. Silicon Valley can't cancel this movement, or this rally, or this congressman. We have a Second Amendment in this country, and I think we have an obligation to use it. The Second Amendment, this is a little history lesson for all the fake news media. We have a right to be free of unreasonable search and seizure in this country, and we better protect it.
Okay, so Gaetz is actually going through his audience's constitutional rights one by one, but someone edited the clip so it looked like the bit about the Second Amendment wasn't the start of the Second Amendment section, but was actually simply referring to who he was criticising in his First Amendment bit. That was quite mischievous, and I have to say, complete malarkey.
It's almost like something that Matt Gaetz would do himself. And that's it for another trip to Planet America.
More on ABC, iView, YouTube and Facebook, and don't forget to pep in all the pod places.
Bye-bye.